We know that there is so much more to do on reconciliation.
Tonight, an APTN investigation into the shocking number of deaths of kids in care becomes an election issue.
It helps to fix their words, to sort of clear their minds, and to work to speaking and saying what needs to be said.
For the first time, people who have to be in a Manitoba court will be able to use an eagle feather.
Just a good place for people that didn't have anywhere to go just to communicate, which is a big thing too. So now the communication is gone. It's sad.
And a soup kitchen in Edmonton is forced to close because of a zoning technicality. Good evening, welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. On Wednesday, APTN News reported on the shocking number of deaths in care. 102 children over 5 years in Ontario. Today, the leaders of the Liberal and Conservative parties were asked about the issue. APTN's Kenneth Jackson has Justin Trudeau and Andrew Scheer's responses.
Our story, Death is Expected, focused on two mothers who lost children, Brianne Leclerc and Alicia Jacob. Just two of the 102 children connected to child welfare who died in Ontario over 5 years. The issue reached the campaign trail this morning. First at a question and answer session between Justin Trudeau and a Globe Mail reporter in Sudbury, Ontario.
APTN's investigation says 48 Indigenous children died under your watch in the time it took your government to make necessary changes in funding. What accountability do you hold for that?
We know that there is so much more to do on reconciliation. We know that this is something that Canadians expect and something we have worked on very, very hard over the past 4 years.
Trudeau then went on to talk about ending boil water advisories, but took no responsibility for Canada's 2-year delay in responding to the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal order to increase funding for on-reserve child welfare. Later in the morning, Conservative leader Andrew Scheer was asked about the matter while campaigning in Montreal.
Specifically, what is your plan to address the deaths of Indigenous children in foster care and address funding inequities?
Well, we'll have more to say specifically on those types of issues throughout the campaign, but I will say that I believe it is incredibly important for the Government of Canada to work with Indigenous leaders to ensure that children in care receive the the highest levels of care possible, that the funding is there behind it to ensure that the levels of care address the needs of Indigenous communities.
The Globe Mail pointed out Conservatives have spent a decade opposing the Tribunal's examination into child welfare.
And you were part of a government that spent over a decade fighting the Assembly of First Nations and the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society at the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. What would you say to those who might say you might not have the moral authority to speak on this particular issue?
Well, as leader of this party, I have an opportunity to chart our own course on these types of issues, and these are issues I will be taking very, very seriously.
Thank you.
Kenneth Jackson, APTN National News, Ottawa.
People going through the court system in Manitoba now have access to sacred feathers to use while giving testimony. 45 eagle feathers were donated to Manitoba courts during a special ceremony Thursday. Brittany Hobson has that story.
In the crisp, early morning hours, more than 100 people gathered at Udena Celebration Circle to welcome a new day in Manitoba's justice system. For the first time, people giving evidence or speaking in court will be able to do so using an eagle feather. Michael Pierre, a coordinator with Manitoba Justice, says it's a welcome change to how things used to be.
The feather guided us in our lives and spoke to how we're supposed to live. And then for a time in our history, it wasn't allowed. And we were threatened if we used our ceremony.
The day began with a sunrise ceremony to bless the 45 feathers gifted to the courts. It ended with an official presentation. The use of eagle feathers gives Indigenous people a culturally appropriate way to navigate the westernized justice system.
They do provide a lot of comfort, that unconditional love that we speak of, and when someone's going through a hard time, it really helps them sort of find that grounding. It helps to fix their words, to sort of clear their minds, and to work to speaking and saying what needs to be said.
This initiative has been 2 years in the making. Chief Justice Glenn Joyal says the court has been grappling with its role in reconciliation.
And we too are trying to understand, what does it mean, judicial reconciliation? How do we as judges make efforts to reconcile in a meaningful way with our Indigenous communities in a way that will be meaningful to them?
Prior to this, inclusion of the feather was sporadic. Generally, Indigenous people had to bring their own. Barry French is one of the 3 people to get the feathers. He received them as part of his work in the child welfare system. He applauds Manitoba Justice for making this first step toward a more collaborative relationship.
It's all about our community here in Manitoba working together, right? So the Indigenous community building bridges into the courts and the other way around.
The eagle feathers will be available for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
200 logging trucks rolled into downtown Vancouver late Wednesday afternoon. The convoy drove from British Columbia's northern interior to protest the future of BC's forestry industry. Mill closures have put thousands of people out of work, and interior communities are struggling. With horns loudly blowing, the trucks drove past Vancouver's Convention Centre, where leaders from municipal and provincial governments gathered for the Union of BC Municipalities Convention. Chief Willie Sellers from Williams Lake Indian Band says the government needs to find solutions and act quickly.
How do we offset those jobs? How do we keep people providing for their families? I mean, being from those resource-based economies, it's a lot more challenging when they start shutting mills down and shutting mines down. There really isn't any turning back from that. So how are they helping us? Hopefully this statement, this protest, this event that's happening today brings light to the situation, and something is done and more money is committed and people start opening their eyes up to the small communities.
The federal election is now on day 16, and in Northern Ontario, Justin Trudeau made some promises to Indigenous voters. In Thunder Bay Wednesday night, Trudeau said a re-elected Liberal government will deliver high-quality health care by co-developing health legislation with First Nations, Métis and Inuit. In Sudbury this morning, he repeated another promise to invest more in infrastructure over the next 10 years, meaning more housing, better roads, and high-speed internet. Assembly of First Nations National Chief Perry Bellegarde welcomed the announcements.
And so anytime we can get the Prime Minister making strong statements, dealing with the healthcare gap, and working with us to co-develop legislation, to respect and recognize the inherent right and treaty right to health care, that's a good thing for our people. Anytime we can get the Prime Minister to make some statements regarding the huge infrastructure deficit and the needs for housing and water and bridges and all-weather roads, that's a good thing. And so we got to hold their feet to the fire. You made these statements, you made these commitments. Let's work together to see them implemented now, sooner than later.
Time for another quick break, or a quick break, and then we'll speak with the author of Distorted Descent, White Claims to Indigenous Identity. Stick around. Here's a look at Friday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. 19 under the sun for Fredericton, showers, and 19 in Halifax. Showers and rain for Nain with a high of 9. Rain and 13 for Happy Valley Goose Bay. Sunny day for Montreal with a high of 20. 15 under the sun in Chibougamau. 23 and sunny for Toronto and London. 21 under the sun for Ottawa. Rain and 16 for Thunder Bay. 11 in Sioux Lookout with moisture. 2 in Churchill. 3 for Thompson. 5 with showers for God's Lake. Plus 12 for Winnipeg and Gimli. 10 with showers in Barons River. Welcome back. Soup Kitchen in Edmonton has been forced to close down. And now hundreds of people will have to find another place to get a warm breakfast and lunch. APTN's Chris Stewart has that story.
It wasn't supposed to end like this. Emptying out the stocks of food meant for people who need it. The gathering place on Fort Road, also known as Matitawin Ota, has been operating out of this closed-down hotel since November 2017. They had a restaurant license. But The Fort Road Business and Community Association appealed their permit, saying it wasn't a restaurant. Last week, the gathering place had to close its doors. Carola Cunningham is the CEO of Nigiginan Housing Services, who operated the gathering place. She feels for those who relied on the service.
We had 80 people lined up, and 6 of them were children ready for breakfast. So very disheartening for us to have to turn people away.
People like James Phaneuf and Amanda Avenio.
They seem to be closing down. We wish it wasn't closing down, trust me. They did a lot of help for us, feeding us every day, like making us feel like at home.
It was just a good place for people that didn't have anywhere to go just to communicate, which is a big thing too. So now the communication is gone. It's sad, very sad.
And if you notice, I'm using bigger.
Robert Noche is a lawyer representing the Fort Road Business and Community Association. He says this is not a case of local businesses not wanting the soup kitchen in the area. It is a case of them not having the proper permit. The surrounding area is zoned for commercial use.
We conceded the good work they were doing. We know the good work that they are doing, and we know the people that they're reaching out to help. We get that. The problem, of course, is the planning documents that the City of Edmonton has adopted for this area did not support this kind of activity.
Carola Cunningham says having this space, which also offered internet services, helped the community. She is sad to see it go.
I don't know how many of the business owners actually live in the area, but it would be interesting for them to talk to their actual community members and find out that, you know, the service like ours is almost essential. It will reduce crime, it will keep people housed, and it will keep people from desperation.
She is hoping a local business can offer a new location for them to set up once again.
Can I keep this? Yeah. All right, thank you. This will come in handy.
And the people who come by now have to find another place to eat, or not to eat. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Defining who is Métis has certainly become a divisive issue. Daryl LaRue has written a book that details how non-Indigenous people are increasingly claiming Indigenous descent. Melissa Ridgen spoke with him earlier.
Daryl, your book is called Distorted Descent. Why did you choose that title?
Well, basically, what I came across doing my research was that there were a lot of different ways that ancestors from the past, particularly from the 1600s, especially from New France or present-day Quebec, who were being used in ways that were quite surprising. So what I wanted to focus on in a way was how those ancestors were being reclaimed today. And so that's why I focus on this idea of descent, and the idea of distorted is that in this case, those ancestors are playing roles that don't actually fit their identities in the past.
So that debate that you're talking about over who is and who isn't Métis in Eastern Canada has led to a very public fight between the Manitoba Métis Federation, the birthplace of the Métis, ask President Chartrand, and then the Métis Nation of Ontario, where there seems to be a more loosey-goosey approach to who might be Métis. So, is that inserted, this whole issue, is that kind of part of this book as well?
No, not explicitly.
Nope, separate fight.
Yeah, I tend to shy away from getting involved in internal Métis politics.
Wise. You've been following several court cases out east about asserting Indigenous rights through Métis identity. Would have been just give our audience a little bit of a catch up about where are we at with those court fights in Quebec?
Sure. So I've basically now surveyed 80 separate court cases, and they've all led to losses in different levels of court, primarily in Quebec, but also in New Brunswick, and just a few in Nova Scotia. And they've all been cases where someone, an individual or an organization, is claiming that they have Aboriginal rights under Section 35 of the Constitution as quote-unquote a Métis person or people. And the courts have decided in each case, in all of those different cases, that that's not the case.
Well, and let's just, for people who may not be up to speed on what we're talking about here, these are people who are using a drop of an Indigenous person's blood from the 1600s to claim that they are today Métis. Is that fair?
For the most part, yeah. In over 80% of the cases, sometimes it could be, you know, a little bit, it could be an ancestor in the 1700s. That happened in a couple cases. But what's also important to know, and this is what this recent piece I just wrote touched upon a couple days ago, is that in about 30% of the cases, the individuals are reclaiming a French woman and remaking her into an Indigenous woman, and are going to court claiming to be, in this case, mostly Métis, on the basis of a woman who is actually French. So they have no Indigenous ancestry.
What should actual members of the Métis Nation be worried about?
Well, I mean, I think in terms of the Métis Nation, but also First Nations people out east, so whether it's the Abenaki, the Algonquins, Innu people, have also been expressing concerns around how this movement, so whether we call it the Eastern Métis movement or something similar, is really opposing Indigenous forms of sovereignty and self-determination. So Indigenous peoples don't actually get to decide who belongs to their community and for which reasons. Instead, what we have is a number of white people who are turning themselves, in a way, sometimes magically, into Indigenous peoples against what Indigenous peoples themselves would like.
Where can people get your book, Distorted Descent?
Well, it's available this week. It's coming out in bookstores across the country in Canada. You could also get it online. You can order it directly from the University of Manitoba Press, who's publishing it. I'm really excited to have them as my publisher. I'm on a book tour right now that starts today in Ottawa. I'll be in Ottawa, Montreal tomorrow night, Wednesday and Thursday in Toronto, and on Friday in Hamilton. So you could find that information online. And I'm excited to be able to talk about some of the ideas in the book and really to hear what people have to say about it.
Excellent. Well, thank you for giving us a little sneak peek before you, well, in the midst of your book tour. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Melissa.
Time for another quick break, but stick around. There's more to come. Here's a look at the rest of Friday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. A chance of snow in Grand Prairie with a high of +5, 6 under sunny skies and high level. Showers and 11 for Medicine Hat. Chance of rain and 5 in Calgary. Showers and 14 in Vancouver and Victoria. 15 and rain in Bella Coola. 15 under sunny skies for Prince Rupert and Sandspit. 3 with snow for Old Crow, +2 and snow in Rock River. 7 with a chance of snow for Fort Liard and Trout Lake. Snow and +4 in Yellowknife. Snow with a high of -2 for Sax Harbor, +3 in snow in Paulatuck. Rain and +4 for Repulse Bay, -5 and snow for Cambridge Bay. -3 with snow for Resolute, 5 under sunny skies in Clyde River. Welcome back. An award-winning film called Nipawistamosawin, We Will Stand Up, has made its stop in Whitehorse. The film follows the family of the late Colton Bushy in their fight for justice in Canada's legal system. APTN's Chris McIntyre has more.
When my brother was shot on August 9th, I was dancing at a powwow.
In 2016, a Cree man named Colton Bushy died from a gunshot to the head after entering a rural property with his friends in Saskatchewan. The farmer that shot him was acquitted, and that decision raised questions about prejudice within the judicial system and anti-Indigenous racism. The film's director, Tasha Hubbard, approached the Bushy family and offered to document the events that followed that incident. Jade Tutusis is Bushy's cousin and a primary figure in the film.
I remember at one point her telling me, I'm not sure what's going to come of this, but I just feel that I need to record what's happening right now. And from there, it evolved into a documentary.
The film premiered April 2019 in Toronto and has since won numerous awards, including Best Canadian Feature Documentary, the Colin Lowe Award for Best Canadian Documentary, and while in the Yukon, the film won a Social Justice Award. Tutusis says the awards are bittersweet because this is a film that nobody wanted to make. After all, if Colton Bushy was still alive, there would be no film. After their stop in the Yukon, they plan to head to Edmonton, and then they're off to the Calgary International Film Festival.
undertake a study on the systemic racism and discrimination against Indigenous people within the judicial and legal systems in Canada. This study must produce recommendations to ensure the protection of Indigenous families who utilize the judicial and the legal systems.
That's my hope, is that every single person in this country sees this film and is impacted by our story to take action against the systemic racism as well as the racist attitudes and biases in our country.
Chris McIntyre, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
Tomorrow, hundreds of thousands of people are expected to march in the streets of Montreal to demand action on climate change. Swedish activist Greta Thunberg will be at the front. She will be joined by Indigenous youth who are already preparing. Tom Fenario has more.
On its own, this freshly planted 5-meter white pine is not a solution to climate change. But for Alohialis Hearn, it's a powerful symbol.
We're at the very center of our nation, of our confederacy. The peacemaker, he planted a great tree. And anybody want to guess what kind of tree he planted? It was a great white pine.
Hearn, a Mohawk from Aguasasne, is lecturing the Dawson College staff and students about how the planting of the white pine nearly 900 years ago united the 5 original Haudenosaunee nations. The lesson? If 5 warring nations can unify into a confederacy, then surely humans can unify in the common fight against climate change.
The state of the world right now, things are looking not very good. But what the positive thing to look at is all of this whole natural world that we see is still caring for us. The trees still grow, they still love us. The birds still sing. The things, they still reproduce, the grass still grows. They all love us still, as human beings.
This lecture and tree planting are a prelude to Friday's massive student strike planned in cities around the world. In Montreal, Indigenous youth will march at the front with Greta Thunberg, who is credited with starting the school climate strike movement. Carrie Rice, Dawson student and Mohawk from Ganawage, will be there and is encouraging others to be part of what he says is a historic movement.
You don't want to be like one day, like when you're 50 years old and your grandkids ask you, hey, were you part of the march to help save the world? And you'll be like, no, I was on my couch playing video games.
And that's what we call the words before all else.
Hearn also hopes that Indigenous teachings can help address the man-made causes of climate change in the long term. He thinks the Mohawk tradition of giving thanks to all living things before gatherings, known as the words before all else, could inspire others to live greener.
And so anybody who learns just even a basic form or even basic form of Thanksgiving or anything, or the words before all else, it helps build that relationship and that connection that you'll have with the natural world.
Tom Fenario, APTN National News, Montreal.
And that is your APTN National News for this Thursday. For much more, visit our website, aptnnews.ca, and stay up to date with the latest by downloading the APTN News app. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow.